The music was noisy, and the lights were dim. I saw the rich woman who might weigh 330 pounds sitting lazily on the couch in the room. Jaden stood beside her. The woman took a puff of smoke from the cigar in her hand and smiled at Jaden. "Babe, come on, sit on my lap." Jaden was stunned, hesitant, and unable to move. The woman's smile froze. After a while, she narrowed her eyes and questioned him. "Then, should I leave?" Jaden's pupils suddenly shrank. He frowned and finally made up his mind. As soon as he took a step toward her, I rushed over and dragged him away. "No, don't go over there." Jaden was shocked and looked at me in disbelief. "And Natalie, what are you doing here?" I stared at his face, and the jealousy in my heart suddenly intensified as I chided him sadly. "Do you know she's old enough to be your mother?" When he heard this, Jaden's face paled, and his eyes turned red. His expression made my heart ache. I clutched his arm tightly and could not help crying hysterically. "Why did you choose her? Am I not good enough for you?" After I said that, the room was enveloped by pin-drop silence. Jaden glanced at the woman subconsciously. She was graceful and rich, and the faint blue light cast a glow on her luxurious fur coat. He withdrew his gaze and pursed his lips. After a long time, he closed his eyes and parted his lips, saying, "I'm sorry." I felt suffocated, and I kept shaking my head. I watched him tear my hands away bit by bit, and there was a deep and dark emotion in his eyes. "She's giving me too much." "No!" I jolted awake from my dream and opened my eyes. It was the next morning, and the morning light was seeping through the window. I was sore and weak all over, and I had some unspeakable pain somewhere. A warm breath fell on my neck. I turned my head stiffly and saw Jaden's beautiful face. He smiled. Evidently, he had slept soundly and had a completely different experience from me, who had a nightmare. I stared at him expressionlessly for a while, then stretched out my hand to touch his forehead. I slid my hand down the contour of his face, past his closed eyes and straight nose bridge. My hand finally stopped on his thin lips. My eyes darkened, and my heart hurt badly. Did his girlfriend ever touch him there? Suddenly, an arm was wrapped around my waist, pulling me toward Jaden. I was completely caught off guard and ended up snuggling into his broad chest. "Natalie," he whispered and placed his jaw above my head. My body suddenly stiffened. He buried his head and rubbed his lips against my neck. His hot lips and breath touched my skin, and it made me feel a little itchy. I hesitated for a moment and raised my head slightly. It was then I noticed that his eyes were still closed, and he was sleeping soundly. My heart skipped a beat. "So," he subconsciously uttered my name. Did that mean he actually liked me as much as I liked him? A buzz sounded, which startled me. I was pulled back to reality in an instant. Turning my head, I saw the phone beside my pillow light up. My phone number was just obtained yesterday when I returned home, and there was only one contact in it for the time being. Could it be? My breathing became tense as I carefully moved the big hand on my waist and reached out to get the phone. I unlocked the phone and clicked on the notification. It was a very concise text message. It read, "You should come to the audition that's happening a week from now." I was stunned. My fingertips trembled slightly, and an unrestrained joy spread all over my body. Every cell of my body was trembling with excitement. Who sent the text message? Why are you so happy? A magnetic low and hoarse voice sounded in my ear. I smiled brightly, touched the words on the screen with my fingers again, and answered without paying much attention. "Mr. Campbell." Surprise came over me only after I uttered my reply. Jaden had woken up. In an instant, I felt the air above my head become heavy. Suddenly, something occurred to me, and I blinked. Yesterday, I ran out of Quade Campbell's room and bumped into Jaden. I turned my head stiffly. Before I could see the expression of Jaden next to me, he held my waist and pulled me into his arms. Then, Jaden leaned over. His breath invaded my pores, and it made my body tremble slightly. He looked down at me, and I looked at him too, my breath hastening. Jaden's eyes were very beautiful. They appeared cold and emotionless, but presently, a gloomy look could be seen in his eyes, as if his mood was somewhat bad. I stared at him and got distracted again. In a trance, I remembered the day I first met Jaden a year ago. I was shooting an urban drama series and was acting as the second female lead, who was a vicious character. All those years, Jaden and I had never met each other, nor crossed paths with one another. On that day, the actor acting opposite me left temporarily as he had something urgent to attend to. The main character, Eunice, saw Jaden in the neighborhood and got him to join the film crew to save the scene. That was the first time we acted together. Moreover, it was a scene in the bathroom. I vaguely remembered that the lighting was dim and romantic that night. The warm water washed down from the top of my head, and I was enveloped in fog. The reserved and elegant man suddenly raised his hand, slowly unbuttoned a button on his shirt, then leaned over to me and closed the distance between us. He stared at me then like he was staring at me presently. Ouch! I hissed. There was a sharp pain on the corner of my lips. I took a deep breath and instinctively glared at him as I muttered, "Jaden, are you a dog?" Jaden pressed his forehead against mine and licked his lips. "What were you thinking about just now?" Something flashed in my mind. My heart pounded crazily, but I forced myself to calm down and looked at him provocatively. "I'm thinking about you." He stared at me and swallowed hard. "But do you believe it?" I smiled slyly with a charming look in my eyes. He frowned as a storm brewed in his gaze. He tilted his head slightly, and his lips brushed over my face and pressed against my ear. "Natalie, if I hadn't called Mr. Campbell last night and said that I was already at the door, would you two have continued what you were doing?" I was a little surprised. "Quaid did receive a call last night." After hanging up the phone, he smiled meaningfully and said, "Someone is jealous. You'd better go back first." It turned out that Jaden was the one who made the call. Wait, so he did it on purpose? Jaden was a little away from me, and his cold hand was on my collarbone. The red marks had not yet disappeared, and he suddenly pressed down on them. "Where else did he touch you besides here?" His tone was ice cold. My heart skipped a beat. Annoyance and gloominess churned in my heart, and I could not breathe smoothly. In his heart, was I really the kind of woman who did whatever she could to become popular? Did I ever do those things when I got along with him this year? Was he blind? Couldn't he see it? However, in a moment, I came to an understanding. Jaden had always been cold to me, and everything about me had nothing to do with him. So naturally, he would not pay attention to it. I could not help but lower my head, and there was a feeling of sadness in my heart. Suddenly, he held my face, and his fingers habitually rolled over. His eyes were dark. "Natalie, answer my question." I tried my best to control myself. I raised my chin, curled my red lips into a grin, and said coldly, "Why don't you take a guess?" He breathed heavily. "Natalie, for the sake of resources, you really..." He paused. His lips moved, and the line of his lips tightened, but he did not say anything more. "What about you?" However, I would not let him go. "Aren't you the same as me?" I sniffed, and some inexplicable feeling of grievance welled up in me. I blurted out impulsively, "We both use our bodies to get what we want. Are you any better than me?" Jaden was stunned by my roar. He was confused at first, but his eyes were gradually clouded over by complexity and gloom. I stared at the change of expression on his face, and my heart seemed to tighten with unease. He finally spoke in a helpless tone. "Natalie, my relationship with Mr. Reyes is not what you think." I was stunned. "Mr. Reyes? Simon Reyes?" I was shocked, and the image of a middle-aged man with a balding head and a big belly immediately appeared in my mind. I forgot to mention something. Jaden's first film was shot by Simon. Simon was an internationally renowned director, and Jaden won the Best Actor award that year with his superb acting skills. Thus, Jaden became a leading actor whom Simon employed regularly and became famous ever since. Jaden's voice continued in my ear. "Although I have been acting in Mr. Reyes' work for several years, we are in a legitimate partnership. He is my respected elder. There is no discord between us." I suddenly realized that he thought that I was talking about him serving director Simon. I stared at his dark and deep eyes and enunciated, "You know I'm not talking about Mr. Reyes." Jaden was stunned for a second and seemed to understand something. He looked at me and spoke with a deep and melancholic tone. "Natalie, I have nothing to do with Eunice as you thought." "That's enough," I shouted, my voice trembling slightly. At that moment, it felt as if my throat was blocked. I knew that Jaden was playing dumb. Simon, the director who propelled him to fame, and Eunice, a good friend of his in the industry for many years, had been mentioned by him as shields, yet he did not mention his rich girlfriend. Was it because he was guilty? Well, what other reason could there be? The next second, I pushed him away, quickly turned over, got out of bed, and ran to the door. Before I touched the doorknob, Jaden hugged me from behind. He grabbed my wrist and pressed me against the wall by the door. I took a deep breath and yelled, "Jaden!" Jaden leaned over, and I could feel his hot and damp breath on my ear. "Are you going to go out like this?" My eyelids twitched. As the bright light shone on me, I realized that I was only wearing a silk spaghetti strap nightgown. Because of the tugging earlier, the shoulder strap slipped off one side, and a large mottled mark appeared with the fluctuation of my chest. If I bumped into the paparazzi in this state, I would become the top trending topic. Perhaps I would even fail the audition that was set to happen a week later. My eyes darkened, and I was a little frustrated. I glared at him, then roughly stretched out my hand to hook the strap. Just as I was about to pull the strap up, my fingers were wrapped by a big hand. My pupils narrowed, for I was startled. What was he trying to do? While I was in a daze, Jaden's thin and defined hand held me, then gently lifted my fingers and brought the strap back to its original position. He moved very gently as if he was afraid of hurting me. "If you use as much strength as you did just now, this nightgown will also be damaged like the dress you were wearing last night." Hearing that, I gritted my teeth with hatred. Was he not the one who damaged the red dress I wore last night? Certainly, he would know exactly how it was damaged. Jaden rubbed the skin on my shoulder with his fingers. His voice was so low and raspy, I could not read his emotions at all. "If you really don't want to stay with me, I'll ask my assistant to bring you a clean set of clothes. It won't take much time. You can leave after that." He put his arms around my waist and burrowed his face into my shoulder. "Natalie, just stay with me for half an hour." As I took in the pleasant fragrance on his body, for some reason, I became misty-eyed. What on earth was wrong with me? Why did I seduce him even though I knew he had a girlfriend? Why did I get myself into such a situation?